What's going on? This is Ryan with Automatic Comics, and up next we are going to go over 5 books that I think look like they have overcorrected right now, maybe good options to pick up. I'm also going to talk about a big key that's getting there. You want to really put that on your watch list, as well as why I don't think you should be all that worried if you feel like you overpaid last year for some of your books and you've seen those prices come down. So stay tuned. Alright, so before we get started, please remember to hit that like button and hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see more content like this. Really appreciate all the likes, the subscriptions, the comments. Remember, when I hit 5,000 subscribers, I'm going to be giving this book away. It is a 5.0 Fantastic 467, first appearance of him, or first cameo appearance of him, who is Adam Warlock, also White Pages copy, that I picked up in the collection buy that I did earlier this year. So I thought that would be a cool giveaway for when I hit 5,000. So we're around 4,650 right now, so let's, just subscribe to the channel so I can give that book away. All right, now let's get into the topic at hand. So I've talked about this before. I watch the weekly Heritage Comic Auction. I price a bunch of books every week, and when I see books that have come down quite a bit, I have been making those trending down videos. And one of the things I've also noticed with those trending down videos is that a lot of times those are books that are potentially pretty good to start looking at, maybe books you want to pick up. The other thing I've seen is that there are certain books that have actually, what I would say, overcorrected. So they're books that typically it's going to be something that was from a movie or a show that maybe wasn't all that successful, but it still has a very popular character. And they have a historical trend before the comic boom, before this movie or show, that they've now fallen below. And so that's telling me that they will probably come back to that trend at some point, and this is your opportunity to pick those books up at a good price. So I've got 5 books I'm going to talk about for that, and then I've also got one big key that's really been coming back to that trend line that I think you'll want to watch for. And then I'm also going to talk about another book, a really, really big key, and why I don't think you should be all that worried if you maybe paid a little too much for one of these books over the last year. So with that, let's get into the first book. The first one here is Amazing Spider-Man number 101. This is the first appearance of Morbius, and we all know about the Morbius movie, the It's Morbin time, everything that went with that, and that movie was just, it ended up being a huge flop. But this is a Spider-Man villain, a villain that's used consistently. It's a villain that we expect we will likely see again in the Sony version of the Spider-Verse. Whether that crosses over really into the MCU or not, I can't say for sure. But what I've got up here is I've got the trends for this book over the last number of years. This is from GPA, this is GPA data, and what you can see is I'm looking at a 7.0. And now this is generally representative across a bunch of different grades, but I picked the 7.0 for this one. And you can see 2 big spikes with this book. The first one was likely around when they announced that they were going to do a Morbius movie. Then it calmed back down again. Then you have that second huge spike, and that's where we have the comic boom, when we saw these big jumps in prices. You also had the movie coming out, and so everything was really driving this book up. But you can see before that you had a general upward trend in this book even before you had the comic boom. And so in that 7.0, back in 2015, this book was $140. Now, I know it is crazy sometimes thinking about some of these prices that these books went for, 5-10 years ago. But when you start looking at actual historical trends with books, it's actually pretty reasonable. Now, the expected price from September of this year, so basically I'm projecting out to now, approximately now, is $690. Now there are ways you can do that. Basically the way that I use is you can use something called compound annual growth rate. I am not going to get into the math on it. I know I will, I think just saying that word I instantly lost half the viewers. But you can use compound annual growth rate to estimate returns and see kind of what books have returned over time. And this book, over those 7 years, based on the estimate from 2015 until now, would be selling for around $690. And this was based on what this book was returning before the comic boom. So basically I took a point from 2015, which is $140, a point when we had right before the comic boom, and I got an annual return of approximately 26%. So with that, it would say that the current price should be about $690 if you completely removed the comic boom from the equation. So not even having that happen, if things had just been increasing in price as they traditionally do with this book, over the last 7 years, this book would have been around $690 right now. It had a recent low sale in July of just $550. That is a 22% discount from where we would expect the book to be even without the comic boom. So this is a Spider-Man villain, and Spider-Man villains are one of those types of villains you can actually invest in. They do tend to continue to go up in price. And this is a book that has historically returned 26% for the last 7 years. Now, will it keep returning that rate? I can't guarantee that, but based on those numbers, this book should be around $690 and it was at a 22% discount. Now, I remember Mickey with Swagglehouse Comics. He did a video kind of touching on this area maybe a month or 2 months ago, and it was talking about the traditional increase in prices in books. And a lot of people, or at least a couple people I saw in his comments, got mad because they said, oh, there's no way that the comics can go up that much per year. They would be so expensive in 5 years and 10 years, that kind of thing. It's like, well, that's what they've done over time. Over long periods of time, when you look at the breakout, especially for key issues, they tend to often return between around 15 and 25% over the long term, per year, annually. And so that's what happens when you have compound annual growth. And that's why you're never going to be able to get your Hulk 181 for $100 anymore. You know, it's not going to happen. The books just traditionally go up bit by bit, year after year. And yeah, it's not like stocks or something where they sell thousands or millions of times per day. They sell maybe a few times a month. And so you definitely have some variation, but when you look at the long-term trends, that's what you see. And so that's why with this book, if you were to buy it right now with taking the movie out of the equation, the comic boom out of the equation, I think it's worth around $690. And so it's at a discount at that $550 sale. So definitely something to be watching. All right, so now the second book. I really like this movie. I know a lot of people didn't like the portrayal of this character in the movie, but this is Avengers number 196, the first appearance of Taskmaster. And I know he appears in a different book as well, but I'm saying 196, first appearance of Taskmaster. And this is a book that I looked at a 9.6. It's a much newer book, so I'm looking at a higher grade, a more common grade that sells very often. And this book, you can see over the long term, well before comic boom or anything, this book has just been consistently trending up. It is a popular character, consistently trends up, is regularly used in storylines still today. And so I looked back at 2012. And so you can see what I did is I basically took a straight line and drew it back to where you start to have some deviation. And it's because when you have something like compound annual growth, it doesn't go up linearly. It goes up, kind of like this. And so you can't really just do a straight line forever. But this one, $80 approximately 10 years ago, September of 2012. This book, when I took, again, a point before the comic boom, it averages a return of 17% per year for 10 years. And so that's what I'm saying here. It's like, this is not like these are very short windows of time for this. This is long periods of time, very consistent, regular increases in price. And so this book, with that estimate, today would be selling for around $385. It had a recent low sale in just August of this year of $275. That is a 29% discount to that expected price. And again, this is the same one. You can see it has a spike. That's likely where you had the announcement of the character or the reveal of the character in the Black Widow movie, and then you had the comic boom spike, and then you have this return where it's coming back to that line. And so these are the types of books that I think you really want to be looking at because they've come back to that normal return where you're not even considering the comic boom in this. And this is why I know this kind of thing might upset some people because I see comments where people are like, oh, prices are going to go back to 2019 or 2018 and this kind of stuff. And it's like, well, historically at least, and you can usually make some pretty decent assumptions from the history of comics like this. Historically, the prices don't go back like that. They gradually increase over time. And so yes, you may end up getting some that drop back down to some type of price like that, but on average, I expect these to return to that mean, that normal uptrend. And so with this one, again, if you picked up that book at $275 for a 9.6, you got a huge discount. And this is a character that there's been a lot of talk that they're probably going to be bringing this character back. They might be involved in the Thunderbolts, all kinds of stuff. So it could also have other factors that are going to drive up the price in that book. All right, now the third book. We were on the topic of Black Widow, so now we've got Tales of Suspense number 52, the first appearance of Black Widow. This is a pretty major Silver Age key, awesome cover. She's on the cover. And again, this is one where you can see that general consistent uptrend with this character. Now the tough thing with this one is that, yeah, maybe it's going to go down some because that character's not in the MCU anymore. But if you look at the long term for this book, it's still a book that's consistently going up year after year. Now, the period that I looked at was the last 7 years, and yes, she has been in the MCU for the last 7 years. So that likely increased the rate of return on this book. And it's possible that that book will drop down some after that. But when you look at even Avengers 196 with Taskmaster, that was consistently going up 17% per year. And that character was not in the MCU, not in anything like that. So with this one, I looked at 2015, so 7 years ago. It had a price for a 6.5 of $430. Then I took a look at the price before the comic boom to get an estimate for what we would expect this book to go for, and we had an expected return of 21% annually. So that would make the price of the book today, 7 years later, $1,625. And you can see, again, this one has two spikes. One was probably the announcement of the Black Widow movie. That's the first one. And then the second one was the comic boom. Now this one has retreated pretty far below that trend line with a recent low sale of $1,121 in July. That was a discount of 31% to the expected historical average. And so again, I think that that is a really good way to approach some of these books, to put them on your watch list. There isn't a guarantee that they're going to go up after that or they'll return to that trend line, but at least historically, that's what I see. And so that's why I think that this is a great opportunity to pick up this book, because this is one where you had the comic boom as well as the movie that, well, personally was probably my favorite from Phase 4, but still not a great MCU movie. And so also with the whole Taskmaster thing that put a lot of people off, it probably hurt that character a little bit in terms of value, or it had people starting to dump books. But then over the long term, that's not going to happen. You're going to have a return to kind of normal sales with that book, and that's where I would expect the prices to return to that normal mean of about 21% return per year. All right, now the next two are probably going to get a few more negative comments or critical comments, that kind of thing. The first one is Special Marvel Edition 15. This is the first appearance of Shang-Chi. Now, I will be honest, these ones, the percent returns are a little tougher to follow. I don't expect them to continue this type of return long term. But the grade that I looked at was a 9.0. This one had a starting price of 2018 because this is one where it was a book that had not nearly as much relevance, as nearly as much demand before we knew that character was going to be in the MCU. And so once you know that character is going to be in the MCU, you have an immediate increase in demand for it. And so for the short term, you're going to have a spike in value. And so you can definitely see that there. With that first spike there, that's the spike in value with the short term where people are like, oh my gosh, we got this new character, we got to get this book. But I had a starting price before that in September of 2018 of $180 for a 9.0. Now, if you look at that trend line, the expected price today would be approximately $1,040, but that's a return of 55% per year. I do not think that that is a reasonable expected return for this book. However, with a lot of the other books that I've looked at where you've got characters that effectively become keys, just because something wasn't popular before the MCU or anything, a lot of people have a hard time getting that out of their head where they're like, oh, I didn't like that book when it came out, or I didn't like that character when it came out. That doesn't matter in these types of cases. I mean, the example I like to give is Groot. The first appearance of Groot in Tales to Astonish 13, I've had people tell me, they're like, oh, that's such a huge key. It wasn't. It wasn't before Guardians of the Galaxy. It was a nothing book. It was a nothing monster book from early Marvel monster books. That book would have been like any other monster book with a character with some weird name, big monster smashing things on the cover. Mid-grade book selling for like $300 to $400. Mid-grade book for that one now sells for about $6,000 or $7,000. And so that's where being in the MCU, getting in the public image, can really increase the values of these books and make people want to go after them. That was not a key before the Guardians of the Galaxy movie, I'll tell you that. I remember I had my old Overstreet price guide. It was just listed out as like issues 5 through 20, you know, and it's like all the same price. It wasn't even broken out separately. It sure is now, because the price is very different for that one book. But it was not before we had Groot become a very popular character in the Guardians of the Galaxy franchise. So that can happen with any character, whether they were popular or not when the book first came out. Now, the thing that I would expect to probably happen with this one is that you had that initial spike. You can see that big spike there and then a retraction. What it probably I would say is that you have the retraction, and then it will likely go to something around that 20% return after that. I don't think it'll retain 55%, but at least for the near term, that's what I've used. And so we had a recent low sale of a 9.0 for $725 in July. That was about a 30% discount to that expected price. Now, again, I don't expect 55% to be a long-term value. I think it will get back down to something that's a little more normal, like 20%, 15%, like a lot of these other books. But I still think that this means that this is a great opportunity to pick up that book. This is a character that appears to be one that they're going to use for a while in the MCU. And so I think that is at least a decent mid-term book to buy, potentially long-term book to buy. All right, now number 5. This one I can already feel the negative comments. This is actually the one I was referring to when I was talking about people saying they hated those characters when they came out. This is Eternals number 1. This is the first appearance of the Eternals. The most disappointing movie of Phase 4 for me. I did not enjoy that movie. I didn't like it at all. Now for this one, I looked at a 9.8. Had a starting price in 2017, around September 2017, of $250. So based on what it looked to be its trend up, for at least for that short term, was around 41% annually, which would make its current price around $1,400. Now, again, this is one that I expect that it will not return 41% annually long term. I think it will likely have now been down to around 20%. Once we get those characters back, we know we're getting an Eternals 2. It's been kind of leaked already. We know that they're coming back. Despite the fact that people hated that movie, they are doing it again. And so I think that they'll use that as a learning experience. I think they will probably end up doing a much better job in that second movie. Just think of movies like Thor 2, then Ragnarok. I mean, people didn't really care for the first couple Thor movies, and then they really liked the third one. All it takes is the right director and the right story, and you can really turn something around for these characters. Now, for this one, the most recent low sale was $695. So that was a 50% discount to that estimated price. But the reality is, I mean, look at that. It is still up almost 3x from where it was 5 years ago. And so, yeah, these books have come down, but they are still well up from where they were before. I do think that this one will likely return to some type of trend up, like 20%, like I was talking about with Shang-Chi. I think they are going to get these characters right. And like I said, this is one that I always have at least a couple people when I'm talking about the Eternals say they hated it when it came out. I'm just telling you, from the perspective of kind of like comic investing, at least with respect to the MCU, that doesn't really matter. What matters is how well those characters are portrayed in the movies and how much people can connect to them in their current iteration. And so, yeah, you may not have liked those books now, but that doesn't mean that people won't care for those characters moving forward, especially if they are able to rework them and make that a successful franchise. So I think that this book at $695 for a 9.8, there is not a lot of risk there. I think that, yeah, maybe it could go down a little more, but probably not very much. And I think long term, especially when we're getting the Eternals back, or at least medium term, over maybe the next 5 years or so, I think it is a very reasonable book to buy, especially if you can get it at this kind of discount. All right, now number 6 here. Now this is the one, it's a big book. I think that you really want to be watching this one because it has come back to that line. It is not below the line yet, it's not at a discount, but it's coming right to it. And this is a character I fully expect we'll be seeing. So this is Hulk number 180, the first cameo appearance of Wolverine. And let's take a look at the prices for this book. So I looked at a 6.0. The starting price I looked at 7 years ago from September of 2015 was $180. This book on average had returned 21% each year based on the price that it was before the comic boom started. So you have 21% each and every year. That puts the estimated price of this book at $685 today. It had a recent low sale of $719. And yeah, that's not down to $685, but it's within around 5 or 6% of that number. So it's not a discount, but that is a good book to watch, especially since this is a major key character, a character that most people really like, a character where people want this book, they want Hulk 181, and you can see that it's returned back to that line. You can see that's the comic boom there, that's the historical trend line, the dotted line there that it's coming back to, and it's right there again. And so yeah, maybe it comes down a little more, but to me that means there is very little risk to picking up this book now, and especially for the long-term gradual price changes that we historically see with this book. And so yeah, no discount, but definitely a book that I think you want to put on your watch list. It might be really good to be going after if you've been waiting, if you were concerned with the price increases from last year. All right, now the last one that I'm going to talk about. This is one where I wanted to touch on why I don't think you need to be all that concerned if you feel like maybe you overpaid last year for a book, or you feel like prices have come down a lot from what you paid, that kind of thing. And so I'm talking about a big key in this one. This is X-Men #1, the first appearance of the X-Men, the first appearance of Magneto. And the book that I'm talking about, the grade right here, is a 4.5. And I've got a few different lines on this one. So you can see with this one, it has not come back to that historical return line that we have seen with a lot of these other books. Now, this book spiked like crazy during the comic boom. It went up an absolute ton. It was one of the bigger movers for these big Silver Age keys. And so in 2017, in September 2017, you could get a 4.5 for $3,500. Now, based on the price before the comic boom, so in September of 2020, that's the number, that's the time that I used for this one. So before the comic boom, this was a $7,200 book. That is an annual return of 27% over 3 years. Now, someone might say, "Oh, that's too much. You know, there's no way that book is returning 27% per year every year." But I've got just kind of down on the bottom there. What I like to do for this is I looked at X-Men #1 in a very fine near mint. So I picked that. I picked a 9.0 because I looked at it. I was like, this is a book from the 60s. It probably, if you have a book from that time period, if somebody's picking it up off the shelf, the likelihood that it's a 9.8 candidate off the shelf like they are today with modern printing is pretty low. And so I said, maybe in the Silver Age, the typical off the shelf grade is a 9.0. And I'm just guesstimating there. And so you have the starting price of 12 cents when this book came out in 1963. The pre-boom price in 2018, because that was the last sale that had in a 9.0 pre-comic boom, was around $52,000. That was what that book was going for. So from 1963 to 2018, you had a 26.5% annual return on that book on average. And that is the magic of compound interest basically put into play there, where if you had 12 cents and every year you got 26.5% on your money, by 2018, so that's 55 years later, you would have about $52,000. So that's what I'm talking about here, where historically, long term, that's why you're not going back to those prices. A lot of people love to talk about the prices they remember from the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s, and this is why you don't get back to those prices. You just consistently have gradual increases. Even if we were just accounting for inflation, you would have gradual increases, and there's more demand for comics than what you have for the prices based on inflation. So going back to this book, over that 3-year period, 2017 to 2020, it had an increase on average of 27% per year. So that puts its estimated price today of around $11,650. And So if you look at what it's actually selling for around now, it's selling for around $15,400. It just had a sale of $15,000, had another sale of like $15,600. So I have it around $15,400. Now, I'm not going to show the equations for how you figure this out. You can do that if you want to go to Google and look up this stuff. Or if somebody really wants, they can reach out to me on Instagram and I can show them how to do it. But basically, you can estimate when it's going to hit those prices based on that continued return. And so at $15,400, that value would be hit in 1 year and 2 months, around November of 2023. And so you can see that it's come down, but maybe it's not going to continue down in that trend. I've seen this with a lot of books where the books went up, but then they stayed flat. And what I think we're seeing is probably something like you see in stocks and that kind of stuff, where it's kind of like a consolidation phase, where you have the prices went up so fast, and now you have a period of time where the prices don't really move, and they just stay flat until they hit that trend line again, and then they'll start going up again. And so this hits that trend line in about 1 year and 2 months. And so you could maybe expect the prices to fluctuate around this for the next 1 year and 2 months. And again, these are just my theories on how these prices are working. There's no guarantee any of this is the exact way that it turns out. If they announce something big with the XMen, you could have spikes in price. And that's why you can have lots of variations in how this turns out. But based on historical trends, 1 year and 2 months. Now, I also wanted to talk about if you paid some price that was a lot higher than where the book is now, why I don't think you need to be all that concerned. And again, it's because of these consistent regular returns that we historically see with these comics, especially with keys. The important thing really is especially with keys. So the peak price for an X-Men 1 during the comic boom for a 4.5 was $32,600. That was a big number. You can see it up there. You can see how quickly that book went up, and also how quickly it came back down. And so for that one, again, you can do the same type of calculation, and to get to $32,600 is January of 2027. And so yeah, that is about 4 years and 4 months from now. It might seem like a little while, but it does mean that at least based on historical trends, you would be back to even within about 4 years. And then it would catch up with that line and maybe continue trending up again. And so that's the case with a lot of these books that are out there. I see two different stories really playing out. You see the ones like I talked about with those first 5 books, or I guess first 6 books, where they went up really fast and now they're going down, and they're getting to that trend line where they had been before. Then you've got books like this one, where they went up really fast and maybe they came down some, but then they seem to be kind of like flat. And what I'm watching them for is to see if they get to that trend line and then continue up again. And so I think those are probably the two main ways that a lot of these books are really going to play out. I think that you're going to have a lot of consolidation for books over a few years, and you're also going to have a number of books that correct back to this line, but then start trending up again. And so it's one of those things that you can go and you can look at GPA, you can look at any of these sites that provide you with these types of lines, this type of data, and you can map all that out, and you can get an idea where books are, where you think they're going to be, which ones are undervalued. These are just a few examples in how I see these books potentially playing out. All right, so I hope you enjoyed this video. Hopefully you stuck around as long as possible. I know it's a little mathy for this, which I know kind of like doesn't always keep people too long, but yeah, this was fun to go over for me. I thought it was kind of an interesting way to really to look at these books and how to identify books that might be good opportunities to pick up right now. Remember, let's get to 5,000 subscribers so I can give this book away. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button, hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see more content like this. I've got more videos over here if you'd like to watch some of my other videos, and the subscription button right here. If you'd like to subscribe to the channel, I'd really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next video.